Welcome to the Enneagram 2.0 podcast. I am Uranio Paes.
And I'm Beatrice Chestnut.
And today we're going to talk about the Enneagram Arrows. A very, very important theme, right, Bea?
Right, the internal arrow line movements within the Enneagram symbol.
Yeah, the Enneagram's diagram is quite an important thing to take into account when talking about types. Types are not only, personalities loose on space. They come from that beautiful, intriguing, and very profound geometry behind the Enneagram symbol. If you have never seen the Enneagram symbol, make sure that you go to the internet, hopefully to our cpenneagram.com website, and have a look at it. The symbol is essential to the understanding of the Enneagram, and then the symbol has those arrow points, connecting points with arrows in the inner lines.
Right, sometimes you see an Enneagram drawn with just the lines and no arrows. And I know that's also the Enneagram, but I often think something's missing there because Gurdjieff, one of the sources of information about the ancient origins and meaning of the Enneagram diagram, he would say that the Enneagram is a symbol of perpetual motion and that it should be viewed as being in motion, that it is a symbol of movement and that a static symbol is a dead symbol.
Yeah, so the Enneagram work without the Enneagram symbol is missing one of the most essential parts. Looking at the symbol as if it was static is not knowing the symbol at all. And the arrows point out to that. And doing Enneagram work without understanding the ever-present flow of energy in those lines, both in the circle and the inner lines, and just taking the types as descriptions of personality will not allow us to do the true work of evolving.
Yes, because the Enneagram is both a personality typology of 9 types and 27 subtypes, but it's also a map of process. It's a symbol that maps a process of human transformation.
Yeah. I don't know you, Bea, but I personally don't like very much when I see approaches to how each of the 9 types can or should develop that do not consider the arrows as one of the main ways to do that. Like talking about what the types can do in a completely disconnected way from the arrows.
Yes, and certainly one of the ways to work with your Enneagram type is studying the automatic unconscious patterns associated with your type. And that's, I think, a very good beginning. However, at a certain point, it's important to see that if you are just looking at your personality type, you're missing other opportunities inherent in the system for growth.
Yeah, exactly. When we consider what those 2 arrow points can bring us, we will notice eventually how those are not any 2 points. They are the most important points for our growth, the most special ones. First, because as they are our connecting points, they are more available for us. Some part of us is already in there, and life brings us to those specific energies all the time as opportunities for us to stop doing more of the same.
I wonder if we need to back up a little bit and get a little more basic, because some people may not know what we're talking about when we say the arrow lines.
Thank you for always doing that. You help me with my sometimes lack of objectivity.
Or just your complex way of thinking.
Okay.
So each of the 9 types is connected to 2 other types by the inner lines of the Enneagram symbol. Now, in some versions of the symbol, you will see the arrows on those lines pointing in very specific directions. So
now, just one thing, Bea. make sure that you see the actual Enneagram symbol, which has those three geometric figures, the circle, the triangle, and what we call the hexad. And I'm saying this because more recently, some people have been using more and more another similar but very different in essence symbol that has three equilateral triangles. And that is not the Enneagram to look at to follow what we're going to say here.
Right. And so in this case, 3, 9, and 6 are connected by inner arrow lines. And
In
then
the triangle,
within the inner triangle, and then points 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, and 7 are also connected by internal arrow line, internal arrow lines.
and there is a whole interesting math behind that that we won't go through right now, perhaps in the future here on our podcast.
But I think one of the interesting things to know about the Enneagram symbol is that it derives from sacred arithmetic, sacred geometry, and that there is a mathematical basis to it,
Totally.
which maybe at some point we could do a podcast on
Oh,
that.
we will, because I really think that is important, but not now.
Yes. Now we'll focus on the arrow lines and the fact that each point is connected to two other points. And it turns out that those two other points are like the perfect antidotes for the challenges associated with our main point.
So now I'll come back to something before that, and I want to be a bit personal. I want to say that when I started studying the Enneagram in 1996, I learned it already from the perspective of the arrows being essential. And I learned those movements in the way that we are going to teach today here for you on our podcast. I'm saying this because when I'm Brazilian, and then when I started traveling to the US, where most of the Enneagram work happened, I noticed that the main approaches to the arrows were quite different. And eventually, all the Americans changed, the American teachers changed to use the same approach that I had been taught back there by a very good teacher. So I think it's very, very important if you are an Enneagram student who has been reading about this system for quite a while, or if you have read or if you have been taught by teachers in the old American way, and by the way, books are not always updated, you need to pay attention and have an open mind to hear what we are going to say now, taking into account that almost all good teachers who share experiences and do cross-learning at conferences have changed their old ways of viewing the arrows.
Although I don't think there's necessarily consensus among different Enneagram
Oh,
teachers
there never is.
about the arrows. I don't think everyone will teach it the way we're going to be talking about it today, which is okay, of course.
But we are very strong in our opinions about that, aren't we?
Yes, and I think that's because we've worked with a lot of people, sometimes on the Enneagram mat itself, following the arrow line movements as a way to invoke a certain experience of the energy of the movement of the symbol.
I'm curious, to me, learning about the arrows was essential in my inner work. So as a 5, I saw that I lacked the energy of 8, and I developed it. And then more recently, I noticed I had too much 8 and not much 7. And I also made sure that I changed. What about you? What is your personal history with arrows, and how working with that helped you personally?
Well, I think I think it's good to start with our personal stories. And I need to back up again to say that one of the really important aspects of the arrows that we teach is that when you work with these two arrow line connected points, it's very important to do that in a specific order, right?
Yes.
So, for instance, I'm a 2, and my type 2 is connected to 4 and 8. Now, if you're looking at the symbol with the arrows in the proper places, there is an arrow from 4 pointing to 2 and from 2 pointing toward 8. So the movement goes from 4 to 2 and from 2 to 8. Now, one of the things that we focus on a lot, that we really emphasize, is that when you're working with these 2 arrow line connected points for growth, and by the way, I think even just the fact that we identify with one Enneagram type is an example of how part of having a type in the way that we talk about it with the Enneagram is a kind of stubborn fixation on seeing the whole world, the world of wholeness that's symbolized by the circle of the Enneagram, through a narrow slice or a overly narrow lens. So for instance, I look at the whole world through the lens of type 2, and that's going to limit me in various ways. And one of the things we're talking about with the arrow lines is how to start encompassing different perspectives as a way of creating more balance. But when you use your 2 arrow lines, you're starting with 2 points that you have special access to and that are specially designed to balance out the perspective of your main type.
Great, I like this. And I think personality is one of those things that can have different explanations or synonyms or definitions. And one of them, if you look at the Enneagram symbol, is your personality is a resistance against going along with the arrows and the wings. And the wings are the lateral points in the circle. So
You mean the points on either side of your main
in the
point
circle.
along the circle.
So for you, B, as a 2, your arrow points are 4 and 8, as you said, but your wings are 1 and 3.
Right.
For me, my arrow points as a 5 are 8 and 7, but my wings are 4 and 6.
Right.
So when we stubbornly, as you said, resist going with the flow of life that
Right.
is always taking us to those 4 other points, we are fixated in personality.
Exactly. And we can almost see life as an intelligent flow of energy or movement, in that we encounter things every day that might open our perspective to seeing things a different way, but we can tend to unconsciously just keep seeing things through the same lens of our type and not kind of go with the flow or meet the opportunity of different things that might bring us to a different place or a different perspective.
Right. And if we understand that, we may understand what the Enneagram really is. It is a map to raise awareness.
By moving us to different perspectives.
Exactly. And we shouldn't be too much anthropocentric in thinking that we make our evolution happen all the time.
Anthropocentric meaning, I can't even say it.
Meaning that we think that we as limited human beings are running the show and making everything happen.
Are moving everything.
So instead, we need to know that life is always providing us with opportunities to go to those wings and arrow points, so that we evolve.
We'll provide examples for the different types going forward, but to get back to my own type, I'm a 2, and my 2 arrow line connected points are 4 and 8. Now, one of the things that you may have heard when you've learned about these Enneagram arrow line points are that each of these 2 points have been called stress and security points. So the arrow against, so in my case that would be 4, has been called the security point.
In my case, it would be 8.
And the arrow with, so the direction going from 2 forward to 8 would be called the stress point. Now,
for me, type 0.7.
Now, I think there is some truth in that. However, I think it's a little more complicated than that.
I agree.
I think that we can go to either arrow line connected point in times of stress.
Different kinds of stress.
Right, and different kinds of reactions to stress. So, in other words, you can go to your security point when you're stressed in order to have something to hold on to, or as kind of a regression into maybe even a younger state or a way of being that helps you feel more comfortable when you're stressed.
To me, B, the thing is, we can go to those arrow points unaware And as we're just taking their getting the worst of those 2 points, or we can use our awareness to go to them. And when we do, we may feel challenged in both ways when we go to both arrows, and that is a little bit stressful.
So I just want to restate this just because it's such an important point. I think we can go to either arrow line connected point in an unconscious way, under stress, kind of as a release valve when we're maybe focusing a lot on our main point. And when we do that unconsciously, we tend to go to the low side of those 2 points.
And therefore we get even worse than before.
We act out the less healthy qualities of the 2 arrow line connected points. We don't turn into those points completely, but we may act like that. But again, in the less healthy, less self-aware ways.
Yes, and I would add, we develop new tools to perpetuate our ego. It's like we get new strategies coming from those other 2 points to do what's the worst on us.
Right, or we just stay stuck in a different way, might be another way of saying it.
Yeah.
But when we go to those 2 arrow line connected points with awareness and presence and a lot of intention, then I think we create a lot of opportunity for growth and transformation.
Yeah, and I think those opportunities are offered by life when we get offered awareness paths. But we not always see them, and we not always say yes to them.
We don't always see them.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah. Thank you for correcting my English. I need that.
Okay. So as a 2, I would then need to work on 4 first, right? Before working on integrating my Enneagram, the Enneagram qualities of type 8, I would need to go to 4 first, is how we might say it. Otherwise, if I just go to 8 and try to develop the qualities that 8s have as a way of balancing myself out, our theory is that any change that might occur would not be sustainable, because the arrow line against is often representative of qualities or abilities, capacities that needed to or were somehow left behind in childhood.
Right. Yes. And I think that you were mentioning the approach to the arrows that call them security and stress.
Right.
And maybe now we can explain that although that's right, we don't believe it's the point, because they usually end up describing the more unconscious and not so healthy movement to those 2 points. We need to use the 2 points instead as resources for growth.
Right. So instead of seeing them as something that just kind of happens to you when you're in conditions of security or stress, these are developmental opportunities.
Yeah, they need to be voluntary movements that we take in.
Right, that we undertake with a lot of conscious intention.
Yeah, intention for getting into our own discomfort zone and grow up.
So the arrow against is, as we said, a point where we sometimes get in touch with something that was discouraged or not supported in childhood. Now,
and why is it the childhood B?
Well, we sometimes also say that the Enneagram is like a time machine. And the arrow against is when you go against the arrow, it's a little like you're going back in time, almost a regression to the past or to childhood. And it's almost like giving yourself a new opportunity to reclaim what you may have not been able to develop in childhood because your environment just didn't support it.
Yeah. So, and going with the arrow is?
And then going with the arrow is like going into the future. It's like the path of spiritual growth as you move forward into your future.
Right, yeah. So going against the arrow is a little bit like connecting to your younger self, and going with the arrow is connecting to your future self.
Right. And so when we go against the arrow, Like for me, if I'm a 2, for me, that would mean in a very intentional way, focusing on developing some healthy type 4 qualities.
Mhm.
So what are healthy 4s really good at?
And we're going to describe all those for all 9 types in a minute.
Right, but what going to 4 means for me as a 2 is something very important. As a 2, my attention tends to be focused on the outside world, on other people. And one of the things I need to develop is a more internal focus to balance out my attention on other people, what other people are needing and feeling, with a connection, more of a stronger connection to my own needs, my own feelings, my own inner experience. And so it's very important for me to be able to have a way of developing that. And one way of doing that is to, in a very conscious way, notice what healthy 4s do. They are more in touch with their needs. They're more in touch with their authenticity. 2s, as a 2, I tend to be a shapeshifter. So when I first started working on myself in my late 20s, early 30s, I realized I didn't know who I was. I didn't have a very strong sense of self because I was always being who other people wanted me to be because I wanted to be liked. And my coping strategy, unconscious of course, was to turn into whoever someone wanted me to be so that I could create a positive connection with that person. But when I go to 4, I get more in touch with my emotions, the full range of my emotions. I get more in touch with my needs. I get more in touch with the idea that all emotions are valid and that you shouldn't be embarrassed to be emotional. 4s are very good at standing up for the validity, the importance of being emotionally sensitive and being in touch with your feelings.
And then you can also be in touch with your own emotions as opposed to just paying attention to other people's emotions.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about, is coming inside myself instead of always having my attention on the outside. It's like a natural balancing out to come to 4.
Right. So, what else should we say about the arrows in general before we describe all the 9 movements?
Well, a couple more things. Um, and that is oftentimes we see that when people work on the arrow against, it's a very important kind of return to childhood. In fact, Almas calls the arrow against the soul child point. And if you look at your own history, often you can see that what that arrow represents was something that just didn't work in childhood or was discouraged. For me, there wasn't really a lot of room for my emotions, that my emotions weren't seen and supported in my environment. So I was motivated not to be in touch with my own feelings and even to repress them and avoid them and then be embarrassed if I showed them in my life.
So, it seems that those crucial moments when our personality has gotten fixated had to do with disconnecting from the arrow against.
Oftentimes, yes. And so when we do that really important work, it's almost like regressing to childhood to reclaim or develop these important qualities that somehow got left behind.
So, besides noticing how we're disconnecting from that arrow
How we
against point,
disconnect.
how we disconnect from that arrow against point, we can remember times when we were connected to it.
Right. And sometimes when we work with people on the Enneagram mat and we bring them physically against the arrow to that point that line connects them to, we see them having an experience of regressing to childhood and having an experiential opportunity to feel into what they need to reclaim, re-own, develop that they don't always have.
Can you just share another word about what you mean by working with someone on the Enneagram mat?
When we do workshops and retreats, one of the many things we do is we work with a large Enneagram mat that we put on the floor, and we physically move people on it to help them get in touch with these energies. One more thing I'll say about myself, I know for me, it was a really important thing for me to be able to get more in touch with my emotions, to get more comfortable with feeling strong emotions the way healthy 4s do, and to be able to connect to myself in a way that was more conscious and more deliberate. Now, after you move to the arrow against, then it's almost like you have more inner stability, you have more inner resources to make the trip to the other arrow line point.
Yes, exactly. So instead of calling the arrow against the security point, we call it the energizing point because we get back to an energy that we've been missing that can really help us be more complete and negotiate a bit with the limitations or neuroses of our own type. And then when we go with the arrow, we call that other point resolution point because after getting that energy from the arrow against, we can actually resolve some old conflicts, old issues, and will challenge ourselves in ways that will make a whole big difference in our lives.
And this might be a good moment to point out that we very consciously don't use the language of integration and disintegration. So if you've been around the Enneagram for a while, you may have noticed that some people describe the arrow against that we're describing as the energizing point or has been called the security point. People have called that the integration point. Well, we think that there are important things to be integrated at both arrow line connected points, so we don't call one the integration point. We think that's a little bit misleading. Now, we especially don't call the arrow width. So in my case, being a 2, the movement to 8, we don't call that the disintegration point. Now, there's a very important reason for that, and that is because we see that as the point of spiritual growth. That is the direction of real spiritual growth. After you've gone to the arrow against, then the really important challenge is to embody the high side qualities of that point. That and very contrary to being a disintegration and that being the end of the story, it's actually a point of balance. It's an antidote in a different way to the main type. Now, I think one of the reasons why it may have been called a disintegration point is because it brings up defenses. It can be a hard movement to that type. It can be a movement that does entail some stress, but I really like the way Sandra Maitre talks about it. And she says, yes, it brings up stress to go to that point, but when we overcome that stress, when we deal with those defenses, it really opens up a lot of possibility for transformation.
Yes, and I think what's truly important for people who came from that previous approach, talking about integration and disintegration, is to understand that both arrow points can bring us good or bad stuff. So we can go against or with the arrow, getting the worst of those types,
When it's unconscious.
and we can go with against or with the arrow, getting very good things when it's conscious.
Exactly.
And so there's no such a thing like one of the connecting points being good and another one being bad.
Exactly.
Now, one other point before we talk about the 9 types, is that the wings, the 2 lateral points on the circle, can also be seen or should also be seen as resources for growth. So what's the difference? The difference is that using the wings as resources for growth is easier. What we get from those 2 points that we call wings is not as difficult to bring in, to take in, and to develop in ourselves. But also, the result is not completely transformational. It's like we are more flexible, we are nicer, a little bit more plural.
They're easier, right? They're more
Easier.
gentle shifts, let's say.
Yeah. While the movement to the arrows are more radical. We sometimes say that when we use the wing points, it's we are searching for evolution, while when we use the arrow points, we are searching for revolution.
Or making revolution,
Yes.
making it happen.
They are more alchemical, potentially.
Right. And for me, to go back to me as an example, when I 1 and 3 can be really important stretches for me, my wings. Now, some people may have noticed that we don't talk about wings in the way they're often talked about. We don't see wings as like a static list of traits, like there is one kind of thing that is a 2 with a 3 wing, or a 6 with a 5 wing, or an 8 with a 9 wing. We think that while our wing points do color our main points, and in fact, each point is kind of defined by the tension of the characteristics of the two wings, we think that it's really much more individual, based on your history or your background or your family dynamics, that your wings can influence you in different ways, that there's not like one. The wings aren't subtypes. They aren't sort of a particular thing. Like when someone says, they're a 3 with a 4 wing, I have no idea what that means. So I understand that maybe they relate to 4, but how they relate to 4 and how 4 colors their 3, that person would need to explain that to me. So we work a little bit against the traditional notion of wings as subtypes. And of course, we focus a lot on the instinctual subtypes. But when we talk about wings, what we mostly use them for is, as you're saying, developmental opportunities.
Yeah, we are, as a school on Chestnut Paes, we are more concerned with how the two wings can help us grow than concerned with how to explain our limited personality tendencies because we use one wing more than the other.
Exactly. So for me as a 2, there are going to be times when it really helps me to lean into my 3 wing, like when I'm in a bad mood and I'm not getting anything done, and I need to just kind of get over myself and really start making things happen and moving through the to-do list, or when I'm sort of looking over some of the details and kind of trying just to get done with something. It can help me to lean into my 1 wing and be a little more methodical, the way healthy ones can be. But then when we're talking about the arrow line points, if you look at each type, and we're going to do this in a minute, and the 2 arrow line connected points, you can see they're just the perfect antidotes in 2 different ways that create just the exact balance that type needs. So in a nutshell, for me, as a 2, when I can go to 4, and it's important for me to go to 4 first so that any change that I can do going to 8 is more sustainable. When I go to 4, I get more in touch with myself. I balance being focused on the outside with focusing more on the inside. I get more accepting of all my emotions and my emotional responses. I get maybe more creative and not just base what I do on what other people approve of. I come more from a knowing of who I am. I become more authentic to who I really am. And then when I go to 8, it's another kind of perfect antidote for me as a 2, in that I get more direct. 2s can be very indirect because we have a hard time saying no, and we don't necessarily want to ask for what we need because we fear rejection. So when I go to 8, I can be more direct, more assertive. I can use anger in constructive ways. I can deal with conflict more proactively, more intentionally, more courageously. And I can step into my power, which I'm often fearful of doing when I'm in 2.
Yeah.
What
I
about
th-
you?
I just want to say, B, that I like you anyway, but when you're using your arrows, it's a little easier to deal with you.
Interesting. Can you say a little more about that?
Yeah, I think that you are less indirect, and I appreciate that as a 5. You just go straight to the point in a very authentic way as a 4, and I have a 4 as one of my wings. So actually, we can meet each other there in our friendship and professional relationship in ways that we manifest what we are, we share what we are feeling, and then we solve potential issues. And then when you are assertive at 8, I also can be that because we also meet in there.
Right.
It's your arrow with and my arrow against.
Right.
So it's quite useful in relationships if you see where are the points that both have access to, either by wings or arrows.
Does it mean I'm more developed than you are? That 8 is my stress point, or a point that's more challenging for me, and it's your more basic point that you go to first?
I think you are more developed than me.
But I don't think that's what that movement means. I don't think meeting at 8 necessarily means that.
Yeah, I just think that we go to the best sides of us. I think that that's what this is all about.
Right. And I think especially when we're doing it more consciously, and certainly we've talked about how we meet at 8 and meet in 4. And sometimes I forget that. And I think when I forget it, it's when maybe I do it in ways that aren't so elegant, let's say.
Yeah, it's just that sometimes we all have blind spots that we think that if we use those two arrows will be less nice, but actually some people appreciate it a lot. Like choose think that if they get the authenticity of force and then go to 8 and be very direct, that they people won't like them. And in my case, I like you even more.
That's great. And I know that people respect me more when I'm more direct and more assertive, and it feels like a risk, like maybe they won't like me. But I think you're right. I think most of the time, because I'm more centered, I'm more intentional, I'm more clear, that it's a good thing for everyone.
Right. And most important, I think you will be respecting yourself more.
Exactly. And, being more again, I think these points stretch us in directions when we do them intentionally that just make us more able to be more whole.
Yes. So should we talk about the 9 types?
Is there anything else we've left out about this? We talked about the Enneagram as a time machine, which I think is a very interesting concept. We've talked about how you need to go against the arrow first before going with the arrow. We've talked about how there are these two levels of movement, unconscious and conscious. I think that covers it. And I guess we can always bring anything else in that we want to.
Yeah, but right after our break.
Become a member now at Chestnut Paes online for a lot more Enneagram content from B and Uranio. Sign up for the annual plan and get access to hundreds of audio files, videos, monthly online classes, articles, and even full online Enneagram workshops. It's a great value. Visit www.cpenneagram.com.
If you like this podcast, visit www.cpenneagram.com for much more great Enneagram content.
So let's talk about the unconscious movement and the conscious movement of along the arrow lines of type 8.
Let's start with the unconscious ones, meaning that when 8s go to 2 and 5, they get not so healthy.
Right.
So what is the unhealthy side of 2s for 8s in the unconscious movement? What do you think, B?
Well, I think they can worry about others more, worried about what other people think of them a little bit more, get more in touch with fear of disapproval, or maybe even overgive as a kind of acting out behavior. It can be maybe more invasive or more manipulative the way unhealthy 2s can.
And you know those moments when you see some 8s doing a little bit of tantrum, but in a way that's more aggressive than the tantrum that 2s do.
Right, a little more explosive.
Yeah, and I think this is not healthy. It's like very demanding on the other, and 8s can get manipulative also. What about when 8s go to 5 in a not so healthy way, B?
When 8s go to 5 in an unconscious way, they get quieter. It's almost like they have a bunker mentality. They withdraw. They may not share as much with other. They may hide out and avoid dealing with people, and maybe think and strategize a little bit more about how to dominate a situation or get their way.
Yeah, you know, 8s have a preference of responding right away and not waiting. But sometimes that's not possible. And it's like strategizing vengeance in a way that's not healthy at all. And vengeance can be even harsher when they do that. And vengeance is a lower side of 8s. And you know, when I think a good image is a lion that's caged. And that's, getting angrier and angrier, but you don't see that yet. It's just accumulation of anger. And sometimes they become much less active in a not so healthy way.
So what about the healthy movement for 8s?
Oh, it's beautiful to see when 8s go to 2, becoming truly vulnerable and emotional, tender.
Or even just more approachable and softer and sharing a little bit more of themselves.
Yes, and mostly emotional, I'd say. It's so powerful to see eights being more emotional and being more
More empathetic.
empathetic, a bit more respectful because they listen better. They are nicer with people. They are more appropriate in what they say, how they approach people.
Right. It's like eights can be focused on where they're going and what they want to accomplish. And when they connect to two, it's like it tempers that a bit and it makes them more connected to other people
Yeah.
and more in an empathetic space.
Yeah, and not only empathetic, they become quite generous. Eights have a big potential for being generous, and that is brilliant. A brilliant way to, add something very nice to the already nice assertiveness of eights.
So, what about the movement to five?
Well, I think that eights learn how to count to three before doing,
Right.
to analyze, consequences of what they will do.
To think a bit more before they act.
Yes, and it's like calibrating the strength that they will use in whatever they are going to do. It's like eights in excess, the excess of the passion of lust, when they are purely eights. They go for too little or too much. It's excess in any of the two sides.
And sometimes they don't know their impact, so they don't know how much force to bring,
Yeah.
let's say.
And they don't know their impact because they are disconnected from the heart and they can connect back to it on two, and because they are not observing when they are disconnected from five. So on five, they observe and they know the impact by observing, but also five means going to the middle point.
And they balance their energy more and allow others to have more independence, and they don't
Exactly.
necessarily need to impose their way as much. They're
Yeah.
a little bit more inside themselves.
Right. And while eights are excessive, fives are controlled, self-controlled. And that is good for an excessive person, an eight.
Exactly. So
So they
now,
become more mental. It's not only about doing.
right.
They plan, they analyze after things happen.
So now what about type 9? What about the unconscious movement of type 9? And that would be first to 3 and then to 6.
When they go to three, in an unconscious way, they may do too much out of unawareness. They may just do automatically in a way that they don't stop. It's hard to stop. It's hard for nines to start, but it's even harder to stop them after they're doing something.
Right. And they may be more productive, but it may be motivated by anxiety, or they may be more scattered. Their efforts may not be so focused because, there are 9 going to 3 in a way that's not so intentional.
Yeah, and many times they are going to action, doing even more than before, but still for others,
Right.
and not for themselves.
And maybe not the essential thing they need to do for themselves, maybe more inessential things that are
Right.
really distractions from what they really should be doing or from their main goals.
And the inessential things have to do with looking outside there to what other people want,
And it
like
could
threes do.
and it could be getting busy in service of avoiding conflict, for instance, which
Yes.
9s tend to avoid conflict a lot.
Right, and then when they go to six,
When they go to 6, you may see bursts of anger for not being considered or protected. There may be more contact with fear and anxiety, and they may act that out in not very conscious ways, passive ways. They may get more passive resistant because maybe it's coming from a fearful place or a sense that things aren't going in the way they'd like, but they don't say it, but instead they kind of go against more a little bit covertly.
yes, that moment when nines can keep smiling at you in
Yes.
front of you,
Yes.
but deep inside they're not trusting anything you're saying, they're questioning, they're doubting.
Right.
That's a little bit of the unhealthy movement to 6.
Right, exactly. And they may focus on problems more and especially threats to their comfort because nines are very oriented towards staying comfortable.
And then they add up even a little bit more of a tendency to procrastinate also.
Right, exactly.
But there is a healthy movement. So when they use the arrow against as the energizing point, going healthily to 3, what happens, B?
So when nines go to 3 in a conscious way, and this is a way that they get energized by having more specific, clear goals that are both based more on what they really need to do for themselves. They may take charge of their own life a little bit more. They may become more self-confident, more open to being recognized for the good things they do. When nines are in 9, they tend to be embarrassed about being the center of attention. But when they go to 3, they can be more welcoming of getting the credit for things, which they deserve.
Yes. So it's about saying more the word I, me, mine, these words.
Right. And engaging in positive self-promotion.
Yeah, and this gives me an opportunity to say something else in general about the arrow movements. Many times, the things we criticize the most have to do with things that we would develop when we go healthily to one of the arrows.
You mean something that we tend to judge because we are not really able to have that capacity ourselves?
Yeah, many times, whenever we say something bad or think something bad about someone, we are just resisting doing that ourselves, and that's what we need to do.
So we're resenting someone for being able to do something we can't do but would secretly like to do.
Exactly. So for nines, it's like one of the things that bothers the nines the most is people who show off, who talk a lot about themselves. But this is exactly what they need to do as nines. And they learn how to do that when going to 3. So we also can't idealize much what we should do when we go to the arrows. Like for nines, it might even be a little healthy to become more selfish and more individualistic, thinking of themselves first.
Well, and especially clarifying their own priorities and focusing a lot on their own priorities and turning those priorities into goals that they then work toward in a more proactive way.
Instead of doing everything for others first.
Right. Or just not being in touch with what they really want or what they need to do for themselves, or doing what they're good at and taking in the positive feedback for that.
And these are all things that can happen when they go healthily to 3, but then they need to go to 6.
Right. So after nines integrate these healthy qualities of 3, they go to 6. And what happens when nines go to 6?
So they learn how to say no, how to go against, how to build boundaries, like healthy 6 do.
Right, because 6s can be good at stating their own positions or naming problems or issues in a proactive way, in a way that other people may not want to hear, but they're motivated to say it because they want to point out the threats and risks and priorities that need to be addressed.
Yes, and nines, when they don't practice these healthy movements, they tend to just go along with whatever other people say, right? Without questioning them too much.
Right.
But when they go healthily to 6, they start questioning. They don't take in whatever comes from the others just because it's coming from someone else.
Right. And healthy 6s can speak truth to power. They can very courageously kind of go against the authority or rebel in a way that might need to happen, stick up for the underdog, but take a risk in maybe even starting conflict in a way that sometimes nines can be afraid to do. But when they can go to 6 and embody the courage and strength that healthy 6s have, they can start up the conflict and not just avoid it or run away from it.
Right. So time to talk about 1.
So first of all, the unconscious movements of type 1. When ones aren't being conscious, they can go to 7 and 4 in ways that aren't so positive, that aren't so helpful for them. And when they go to 7, out of, again, just out of stress or out of unconsciousness, it can be kind of like there's a nervous energy that fuels a focus on pleasure that isn't really restorative, that isn't really maybe that fun for them, but it's almost like they're trying to get away from some sort of resentment or anger or irritation by using humor. That you might see a 1 being sarcastic or acting fun, but just being resentful of the fact that they have to be so responsible.
Yes, and it's like ones can have a great sense of humor, but when they go to 7 in an unhealthy way, they can be cynical, they can be ironic in ways that are not good. So it's like using humor to convey the anger that's in the inside.
Right. And it can be a kind of impulsiveness that expresses more anxiety and frustration than a true opening up to something pleasurable or relaxing or fun.
Right. And then what is the unhealthy side of going to 4s at times for ones?
Well, I've noticed that some ones, when they go to 4 in an unconscious way, they can get depressed or despairing, or it's almost like a stressful move drives them to be even more self critical, like more deeply self critical, not just noticing an error that they might have made and correcting it, but almost getting more into that feeling like there's something wrong with them at a deep level because they're not perfect.
It's like instead of stopping being so self critical, they add self loathing to self criticism.
Right. And ones by nature tend to put a lid on a lot of their emotions, but it's almost like they get more emotional in a way that's kind of overwhelming and that actually causes some distress.
Yeah, and sometimes they get emotional still being alone, still retaining the emotions like some 4s do.
Yes, again, it's like they can go a bit into a hole, into a depression, and not really know how to deal with that experience.
But there is hope for ones if they use the movements as energizing and resolution points. So, what can be good for ones when they go to 7?
Well, I think this is one of the clearest examples of how these arrow line movements are so good for people.
It's so fun to see ones at
Yes.
workshops when they do that.
Yes, it's like sometimes ones will say they weren't really allowed to play and be free as children. Maybe they got criticized or they had to be responsible at an early age. And so when they go to 7, it's like they learn to become more flexible. They learn to allow themselves to be more creative, more spontaneous, more future oriented in a positive way instead of trying to make everything perfect way.
You know what I observed, B? That ones going to 7 in the good way, it makes them look like they are 10 years younger.
Yes.
It's like becoming youthful, playful, and being silly in a good way,
Yes.
and less serious.
I've seen some really healthy ones, and they're so funny and light.
Yeah.
And I think that's a great example of the positive movement for any type to any type. But for if you know a 1 that is really accessing 7 in an intentional, positive way, you can see the power of these arrow line movements.
And it's also about flexibility, innovation, creativity, curiosity.
Not doing things always according to the rule book or the process or the structure, but allowing for more free thinking.
Spontaneity.
Yeah, exactly.
And when they go to 4?
When they go to 4, they get access to deeper feelings in a way that feels enriching instead of stressful, I think.
Yeah, I also think that one of the resolutions ones get on 4 is that they stop controlling themselves so much. 4s are not exactly self-controlling.
Well, too, because they recognize that it's okay to be emotional. And so I think ones, when they go to 4 in a healthy way, they embrace their emotions more, even anger and fear and sadness. They get more in touch with these feelings and they realize it allows them to connect more to who they really are rather than just trying to be a perfect human or someone who is doing everything right.
I also think they express more all of that.
Yes, it's like almost they allow for a healthy lessening of self-control in terms of being able to express their true identity in a more creative way, in ways that are more natural, that aren't so tempered by what they can think of as their need to be appropriate.
Yeah, and it's like allowing themselves to do what they want to do instead of what they ought to do.
What they should do or
Yeah.
what they must do. Yes, allowing them to go for meaning rather than just following the rules.
So type 2.
I know a little bit about this type since this is my type, and I've already said a few things about going to 4 and 8, but in an unhealthy way, I'll say that I've seen myself become more emotional in a way that feels a little bit out of control, like too moody, having a temper tantrum, or getting really stuck in hopelessness. I've had that experience. Like I can go to a place where everything's bad and I kind of convince myself that there's no hope, and almost as a defensive way of not trying to change anything, of sort of wallowing in a kind of suffering.
Yes, it's when choose get fixated on feeling misunderstood and not appreciated.
Exactly. And maybe becoming overly needy in a way that we don't own. And so, almost standing up for our needs in an angry way after we've neglected our own needs for a long time.
Right. And going to 8 in the bad way?
So when I go to 8 unconsciously, I notice I can have real explosions of anger that are very uncontained and that aren't very constructive, let's say. I can get bossy and pushy and controlling
So
all of a sudden.
is this why sometimes I tell you that you might be bossy?
I have no idea why you would tell me I could be bossy, because I know I'm always being bossy for your own good.
And I can also be bossy, of course.
Yes, yes.
Now, yeah, I also think the
And I know you only call me your boss to humor me.
no, I don't.
You make
You
me
are my
think I'm
boss.
in charge.
Okay. So I think that choose can also become excessive when they go to 8s.
Definitely, I can become very excessive. It's like I've neglected my own needs, or I've tolerated my own needs going unexpressed, and then I can get really self-indulgent. Like I'm gonna just buy everything at the store to make myself feel better. I can sort of eat too much, drink too much, and I can also go to a place. Sometimes, unhealthy 8s will see their truth as the only truth, and I can definitely do that.
Okay. And it's quite beautiful, in my view, to see choose when they do the right movement. And you talked a little bit about that. What would you add, B?
Yes, I think, I used to go to 4 in a less conscious way, especially when I'd been around people a lot, and finally I'd get alone and I'd just start crying. Now I think that I don't allow myself to get to that point. I more go into my emotions more as a choice, more as a resource to connect more to myself, to understand that my deeper emotions bring information about who I am and give me more of a sense of myself. And so I think there's a way that I recognize my own needs. I recognize my emotions and I embrace them, as opposed to, say, being embarrassed by them or thinking that I'm not supposed to be emotional. And almost get in touch with a positive kind of pain, like a pain that needs to be felt and worked through in order to move forward in some way.
Yeah, because the pain that more basic choose get in touch with is just the pain of other people not valuing them, not saying good things or appreciating their help. While when they go to 4 in a deeper way, they get in touch with truer pain of themselves, that of their biographies. And by doing that, I always feel very touched when I see that it choose become more humble. It's like in personality, with pride, choose think they are above all that pain. And when they go to 4 and they get in touch with that, everybody around starts seeing them as equals.
Or even more than that, I think my experience has been that I was often afraid of my own emotions. I didn't know what would happen if I really allowed myself to cry or to be angry. It was sort of unknown territory because I would repress feelings out of a fear that they would get between me and other people. Like people won't like me if I'm angry or sad. But now I think I can see my emotions as a powerful source of sensitivity and strength and emotional intelligence. And another example is, when I became a psychotherapist, I noticed that a lot of my 4 friends were really good psychotherapists because they're really empathetic when they're working on themselves, and they're really good at accepting pain as part of life and supporting other people in feeling their pain, almost standing up for the value of emotion. And I think that was something I learned when I was becoming a psychotherapist that felt like me getting more in touch with the 4 in me in a good way.
Hmm. And then going to 8, they can just set better boundaries to other
Yes, that's
people,
very
and
important.
to be more direct in saying what they don't want other people to do.
Yes, it's very hard to be direct as a 2. And so thinking of my healthy 8 friends, it really helps me to be more assertive and just say my truth, and to know that honesty is the best policy, that you don't have to sugarcoat it, that actually creates more problems. And I think, too, being able to learn to be angry and have conflict in constructive, positive ways, in ways like usually I try to do it after I've processed my emotions and I've gotten clearer on how I feel and what I need and what I want and what my opinions are. Then I can take action and be more direct and be clearer, which often helps me become closer to people. I would always be afraid that if I have a conflict with someone, if I expressed anger, that the relationship would be ruined. But on the contrary, when I can go to 8 in a healthy way, I can make myself heard and even get clearer on my position in a way that I think helps me have better relationships.
Good. Now, type 3.
So the unconscious movement of type 3, when they go to 6, can look like becoming a bit paranoid and fearful, becoming more anxious. And sometimes this happens if they slow down, or if something happens that prevents them from getting to their goal. What
They
else?
become more anxious. And I see some 3 leaders that when getting to the not so healthy 6 space, they really don't trust other people, and they ask for 2 different people to do the same job, or they confront, or they can manage by conflicts out of the bad energy coming from 6.
Right, right.
Another thing that might happen with 3s when going to 6 is some analysis paralysis at times.
Hmm.
Like, I'm not sure if we should do that, maybe that can happen, and so on. So, normally, 3s are pretty fast in decision making, but if they are not fast, they're very slow. It's like they will not move on because of fear of image, or some
Or
fear that they
fear
are not seeing something.
fear of failure can
Yes,
come up.
fear of failure is a big thing for 3s.
Yes.
Now, when they go to 9s in a not so healthy way,
When they go to 9 in an unhealthy way, in an unconscious way, I hear 3s tell stories about, I just collapse on the couch and watch Netflix all weekend. It's like a zoning out that's like a complete getting away from the momentum and the movement and the forward progress that they're often in.
that may take weeks at times.
Yes, it's like they get stuck in inaction, because, and sometimes this is a form of collapse because they've been working so hard.
Could be a burnout also at times, which is the body. And again, type 9 is the body, is in the body center. The body is reclaiming back a slower pace, but because the 3 has exaggerated first in a very high pace, they may come back to the lowest pace ever when they go to 9 under stress.
Right, exactly. And sometimes they can start avoiding conflict more. Normally, threes can be pretty decisive, and they'll say that they don't love conflict, but they can do it. But they may get more indecisive. They may avoid things more.
Now, when threes go to 6 in a healthy way, they start just asking the most important questions ever. And the best one is, who am I? If I keep shape shifting, what is the truth about myself? Like sixes ask questions of all sorts. And if threes do more of that in a healthy way, that's great.
Yes, and when threes go to 6 in a healthy movement, it's also about slowing down and allowing themselves to get in touch with fear in a healthy way. Sometimes they can be charging toward a goal and they aren't really looking at the dangers, and they may stumble because they haven't thought everything through because they wanted to move forward so quickly. So when they go to 6 in a healthy way, they can slow down a little bit and do what healthy sixes do and say, okay, what do I need to be aware of? What do I need to look out for? How do I need to be cautious in this situation?
Yeah, like looking at risks instead of speeding forward. And it's like getting details right and do more problem solving to optimize results instead of just going faster.
Exactly.
And then going healthily to 9, what happens, B?
When they go to 9 in a healthy way, they're able to relax in a more conscious movement. So,
Finally.
yes, instead of like collapsing on the couch and needing to watch TV for 3 weeks, they can do it in a more measured way. They can slow down and take care of themselves, find a better work-life balance, connect to other people more. Like a lot of times when threes are, say, working with others, it's almost like they don't really want to hear what everyone says if they go against their goal or their plan. And so when they go to 9, it's almost like they get connected to people more in a positive way, the way healthy 9s do, by listening to people
Oh, that's big.
be-
That learning how to listen to people online.
and being more inclusive.
More attention to others, not only to self.
And most of all, learning to be and not just to do.
Oh, wow. That's a good 3.
It's like being able to be more easygoing, know more of who they are instead of always needing to perform or prove themselves. Let's do a short break.
Hello, it's me, Uranio. Just to tell you that B and I launched a new online workshop called the Enneagram Masterclass. It's a 6-hour video course that you can access at cpenneagram.com. You can go at your own pace and have lifetime access to it. Many beginner students have already watched it, but advanced students can also learn about the 9 types in a deeper way. We can't wait for you to check it out. Get $75 off your purchase by using code ChestnutPaes75 on cpenneagram.com.
B and Uranio teach in-person inner work retreats and professional workshops all over the world. They happen twice a year in California, London, Shanghai, Sao Paulo, and Cairo, and sometimes in other countries and U.S. locations too. Hundreds of students from all places and levels of knowledge have joined these courses. You can see the full Chestnut Paes Enneagram Academy calendar of events at www.cpenneagram.com.
Did you know you can study with B and Uranio and work toward becoming a certified Chestnut Paes Enneagram professional? Join one of their workshops for professionals interested in integrating the Enneagram in skillful and effective ways to build your confidence applying the Enneagram as a tool to support your clients' growth and development. Learn how at www.cpenneagram.com.
Do you want to dive deeper into the Enneagram? Do you want to take your self-development to the next level? Join B and Uranio in their live retreats and register to be a part of their personal mastery program. You can become a Chestnut Paes Black Belt by taking all 3 of their intensive Enneagram-based inner work retreats.
Now, 4s.
When 4s go to 1 in an unconscious way, they can become critical, they can nitpick, they can get more controlling and be hard on themselves in a very self-critical way.
Yes. Also, I think that fours on four tend to have this tendency that things are never enough, things are never completely beautiful or right. And when they go to one, that can get worse.
Right.
They will be even more picky and critical and, being more detail oriented.
Maybe get lost in the details that aren't really that important because it's fueled by that four sense of what's missing or what's never going to be be something that matches their ideal vision.
Yeah, and they can become even more critical of self and others.
Right, even to the point of being more masochistic.
Hmm. And then going to two, what can happen that's not so good?
I think sometimes when fours go to two in an unconscious way, it's like they start focusing more on people, but in sort of an anxious way, sort of like worrying too much about what other people think of them, trying to get others to approve of them in a way that's fueled by anxiety and a need for affirmation that's not coming from such a healthy place.
And when they do that, they might even lose one of the good qualities they have, which is authenticity.
Right, they can start shape-shifting more than is really natural for them to do instead of really telling the truth, which fours are actually very good at. They can say things in a way that they think they need to say them because of that's what other people want to hear.
Right. But fours can go to one in a great way, like getting more disciplined. And when fours have this capacity of saying, yes, I'm feeling a lot, but I have this thing to do in the next half hour.
So you're saying when they get more practical.
Yeah, that's excellent for fours. By the way, getting a little busy in the good way might be good for some fours, not all, because then they will cope with the emotions. Emotions not always need to postpone action.
Right, exactly. And they also get more into their body, which I think is a good thing for fours. Instead of being so identified with emotions, not only getting more into action in a practical way, but feeling their body more, getting more in control of the oscillating emotions, not judging themselves for being emotional, but being able to be more steady in that they are balancing their emotionality with their need to be practical or achieve a certain goal or improve things in a way that's positive.
Or even like putting their creativity into action.
Right, and maybe a step-by-step way and following structure, which I think can be really good for fours. I used to have a four friend who sometimes when he would get overstressed, he would go into his garden, and his garden was perfect. Like the rows of flowers, it was like an art piece, but being in his garden, being in touch with the earth, in touch with nature, and doing things in a very structured way was very relaxing and good for him.
Yeah, so fours can still do things perfectly, but add their own touch.
Right, right. And in a way that supports themselves instead of being something where they are harsh on themselves.
And then going to two, I think that they finally learn how to get outside of themselves. What happens with fours is that they spend too much time in the inside, feeling. And on two, they look at others.
Right. They balance the internal focus with more of a focus on the outside. They balance being focused on their internal territory with being focused on others. They also, I think, focus on being of service, on supporting others, which I think has a natural effect of getting them out of their own heads and getting them out of that comparing mode.
And being less self-referencing.
Right. It's not just about like how you might be better than me or I might be better than you or what you have that I don't have. It's actually about us being in relationship together and supporting each other and appreciating each other in the way I think that healthy twos can do.
Yeah, and sometimes when we look at others, we realize that others might have a situation that is even harder than ours.
Right. And another thing is I think sometimes fours can get authentic almost in a way of like daring other people to not appreciate, who they are as an individual. So I think there's something that balances fours out at two, almost like, yeah, I am who I am and I have a unique identity, but I can also be flexible if I want to connect with you. I can also meet you halfway. I don't have to stand up for being my authentic self. I can lessen my worry about that and be more easygoing and be more likable by being a little bit more flexible in what I might need to do to meet you halfway.
So time for the head types, starting with type 5. For us, type 5s, I think that we run a risk when we go to 8 of pushing people even more away with more assertiveness, more even, verbal aggression at times. So we're still controlled by the isolation and the passion of avarice when we use 8 this way. What else, B?
I think there's a way they might express power in service of withdrawing, making too many boundaries, having kind of a aggression behind their need for boundaries.
Sometimes 5s become a little more radical when they go to 8.
They can be a little more
8.
arrogant and dismissive of other people.
Yeah. And then going to 7 in the bad way, they can become distracted. They can become really, a little less responsible in terms of results or deadlines. When you're nervous and you smile a lot, that happens a lot with 5s when they are really under pressure.
Right. I've seen that happen like at a cocktail party that a 5 didn't want to be at, and they're trying to be social, but there's a sense of awkwardness and fear underneath it, so they can be a little scattered and not so self-confident.
And there is a way that 7s are not connecting. They're also self-absorbed or distracted or just going for stimulus outside there. And that can serve 5s who are still not willing to connect.
Right, that makes sense.
But when 5s go to 8 in a healthy way, they reconnect. It's wonderful to see that when I speak my truth, when I say what I don't like, or when I truly get closer to the person I'm disappointed at, I can start loving the person again. All I want at those moments is that the person can bear that I'm speaking my truth and being not as calm as before. Now, eights for 5s represent not only authenticity, but also assertiveness. And I think that's needed for 5s because 5s can get very too much theoretical or indirect, not in touch with emotions. And I do think that anger is an emotion that can open up the whole heart for other emotions later.
Right, right. It's like you can see 5s own their strength and their power more when they go to 8 in a healthy way, become more of a leader, express their power in a good way, and have positive conflicts. Dare to be more assertive.
Yeah. And I think that 5s reconnect to the body when they go to 8s.
Right.
As 5s, we have this crazy tendency to think that the body is just a support for the head.
Right. Yeah, and I've been around 5s when they get in touch with their power, and it can be quite a knockout.
Yes. And when they go to 7, as a resolution point, they can be joyful. It's so hard for a 5 to feel joyful.
Right.
Because when alone, gathering knowledge or observing, it's not joyful. It's nice. It fulfills parts of us. We can be happy, but not really joyful.
Right.
So being joyful has always to do with feeling connected to life, to emotions, to myself more fully, and to others, of course.
Exactly. It's like allowing yourself to go more for pleasure and more deeper contact with others instead of only being satisfied by the life of the mind.
Oh, yeah. And I think that the healthy 7 movement brings spontaneity for fives.
Right.
You know, in my teenage years, the thing that I missed the most in myself and I would see in others and would regret that I didn't have was spontaneity.
Ah,
And I would suffer with that. And it took me a long time. I think that now in my life, I can be very spontaneous and I feel so good when I'm that way.
and now sometimes I suffer because of your spontaneity.
Right. Oh, wow. How
You're
so?
so spontaneous now, like when you don't follow the outline that I've set up for our training.
Uh, Sometimes it could be a bad movement to seven, but many times I think it's a good one because I'm allowing myself to go with the flow. But I know that it's hard for your self-press instinct.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And sometimes I need to go to 4 and recognize that we need to allow for creativity in the moment.
Right, and you've been doing that, and I really appreciate that. So we always find a middle point, and I think that's good.
Yes, exactly. And these arrow line movements surely help us.
Oh, wow, a lot.
Yeah.
Sixes.
Sixes. So the unconscious movement of type 6 to 9 often looks like the 6 having less focus and anxiety kind of gets dispersed. They get more indecisive, more vague, and they may vacillate between being mistrustful of others and over relying on others or being overly adaptable to others.
Yes, and going to nine, sometimes sixes trust even less themselves.
Yes, they can get more caught up in self-doubt, and that can lead to self-forgetting.
Yeah, a lot. And it's funny that sometimes sixes are very anxious, very, stressed out, but sometimes they go to a point of giving everything up, temporarily. And that's also not too good. And that's when they use the 9 point in a bad way.
I see.
And then when sixes go to three in a bad way, when anxiety connects to nervous action and the person starts doing, but without much focus or objectivity or doing what's not needed, that's sometimes what I see when sixes go to three in the unconscious movement. What about you, B? What do you see?
Yes, I think sometimes there's a kind of taking refuge in achievement and really sort of getting more active, but in a way that isn't that ultimately productive.
And also, sometimes sixes start seeking for too much approval and recognition by others.
Right.
Although for sixes, it's usually reaffirmation more than approval. But on three, they can depend too much on what other people think.
I mean, reassurance?
Reassurance, yes.
Right, right. Yeah, I can see that. And I think that sixes and threes, it's almost like they get a little caught up in the activity of reaching goals and getting things done, and they kind of lose themselves and doubt themselves in a different way from just being sort of in action and not being able to slow down and be more grounded.
Now, the positive movement, when sixes go to nine, they relax. So important for sixes to relax. Here's a point about general theory on arrows. Like you said, B, we need to go to the arrow against before we go with the arrow. So what that means is that before sixes learn how to go into action on three, they need to relax.
Right.
There is a certain order of the factors for
Yeah.
all of us. For sixes, before learning how to be more productive and going into action, procrastinating less, it's a must. They need to relax. And
Right.
that's done on point 9.
Right. And if you ask nines if they trust people, most nines will say yes. They're pretty trusting. And I think that's another good thing that happens for six when they go to 9 in a conscious way is they start becoming more trusting. They start getting more connected to more people in a deeper way. They become less suspicious of others.
And going to 9 means also going to the body center, and then the heart feels less anxious because there is a body underneath the heart. It's like the heart feels there is a cushion underneath it.
Right. It's like they can take refuge a little bit more in the strength of their own body than in fearful scenarios that can get them thrown off.
Right. And then going to 3 after going to 9, they can grow much faster by stopping procrastinating, going for action, even if there's no certainty yet. But there is a decisiveness that comes up for 6s, and they start valuing achievements and not only risks,
Right, right. They
not only
see
mapping out risks.
exactly not only threats and risks and fears, but also opportunities to make progress, to achieve things, to be recognized for who they are. I think when 6s are really at 6, they tend to be very self-deprecating, and they often feel incapable of really taking their place and being seen and recognized, say, as a leader, someone who's confident and decisive. And I think when they go to 3, that really helps them with that.
I agree. And, we say that 6s have trouble with authority. And one
Yes.
of the troubles is they are reluctant to be in the authority.
To own their own authority
Owning.
instead of projecting it onto other people.
Right. But when they go to 3 in this healthy way, they say, it's with me. I'll do it. It's like electing oneself to be the ones.
Yes. So now what about type 7?
When 7s go to 5 in a bad way, I see things like when they are getting in touch with pain, they stay alone. They don't show that. They don't share it with others. They don't process it because they don't want to hurt the image of being positive people. Or also they sometimes become even more mental going to 5. Like they get even more distracted also, and they go to mental activity in excess that pushes them away from the body and the heart.
Right. And sometimes they can react to being too social, to being too isolated. They can get really quiet and kind of go inside themselves and not reach out to others when it would be good to do that.
Right, right. Now going to 1 in, yeah.
I think
Sorry,
one
Becky.
more thing about 5 is 7s can get more anxious about freedom. And if they feel limited anyway, if they feel like they're not getting what they need, there can be some anxiety that comes up, and they can respond to that by getting quieter, less spontaneous, and a little more controlled, and like you said, more mental.
Yeah, I think this is a good point because both type 7 and type 5 value freedom a lot. But, 7s need to be less concerned with that. And when they go to 5 in this unhealthy way, they may get even more concerned with freedom.
So when 7s go to 1 in an unhealthy way, what
Sometimes
happens?
they become very self-critical and especially critical of others. And a little bit like it happens when 1s go to 7, they can have irony in their sense of humor and be a little more attacking in somewhat indirect ways, but become inflexible even.
Right? They can get more controlling, more uptight, more tense,
Or irritable.
and they can focus a lot on not getting things right or not being perfect, and start to feel bad about that inside.
It's funny that we observe at workshops that either 7s are not self-critical at all, or they are too much.
Right. And they may not always show this, but they can start really beating themselves up inside. And while they might get more focused, they also get more anxious and more irritable.
Yeah. Now, when they go to 5 as a positive movement, they develop the capacity for introspection. They stay with themselves without needing too much external stimulus, and they also become more consistent, because there's this tendency of 7s for generalism, while 5s go for specializing. And they can become more consistent, going deeper and deeper in one thing.
Relative to that, sevens are often called jack of all trades, master of none.
Yeah.
And so when they go to five, they can replace that sort of breadth of interesting things they're doing, sort of going more shallowly into many things, with going more deeply into things they really care about or really interested in. They can learn more, research more, slow down, and really sink more into the moment and into an experience or learning more about something they care about.
Right. So it's about developing a calmer and more centered energy. But then, yeah.
And also, I think they can deepen their relationships. Sometimes they may, because they tend to want to move fast, or they can sometimes look for escape routes if discomfort comes up. They can stick with that a little bit more, and because there's something about sinking more into relationships or experiences that allows them to have a more calm, more centered energy, and even become more receptive to feedback because they're in a more thoughtful space.
Right. And then going to one after going to five positively, they develop that much needed capacity to focus on one thing and going to the end with it before opening up more possibilities.
Right. It's like they become more able to implement their creative ideas.
The idealism goes into action.
Right. It's sometimes sevens will say they like brainstorming, they like coming up with new ideas, but then they can lose focus or lose interest when it comes to doing the things they might need to do to execute on their ideas. But when they go to ones, execution becomes interesting and enlivening.
Yeah, they become more realistic and more grounded in the body, and others feel that and appreciate it.
It's like they can see that their pleasure actually gets more satisfying if they have more discipline in their life as well. If they can balance their creativity and their desire for fun and pleasant possibilities with a more serious consideration of the things that need to be done or the important things they need to focus on.
Yeah, but I think the main thing is to finish up what they have started.
But also getting in the body and not just in their head, right?
And once, many times also say, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do that. You know, prioritizing.
Yes, yes.
And now it's time for our top five. What's our top five today, B?
So today we're talking about the top 5 most direct types or subtypes.
Yeah. What do you mean by direct? Straightforward?
Straightforward, straight to the point, no little tolerance for beating around the bush, just kind of being straight ahead.
I can't wait to see what are your 5 selected types that are more direct. Let's see. What's your number 5, B?
My number 5 is 5.
Really?
I think 5s can be very direct. And I wasn't really sure about the subtype. I have both social and one-to-one or sexual. I think self-preservation 5s may be a little bit less direct. I think it may depend on the relationship or who they're being direct with. Certainly they're capable of it. And I also think 5s are very objective. But I think one of the things that I respect about 5s is they want you to be direct with them, and they tend to be pretty direct.
One of the 3 subtypes of 5 is included in my top 5, but not the 5th.
What's your number 5?
My number 5 is sexual 1. I think they are very direct, perhaps not as much as others, because it's hard for ones to just say the main thing they're critical at. They need to say more.
Yes.
They need to keep talking about details of what they are critical at. But, especially sexual ones, they go straight to the point.
Yes.
So this is my 5th.
Yes.
What is your 4th?
My 4th is sexual 1. For all the reasons you just said. I think they tend to be very direct. And again, a lot of times there are types that are direct that also want you to be direct with them. And I think that's certainly true of ones generally. I was a little bit in doubt whether I would say sexual 1 or social 1, but I think sexual ones are probably a little bit, have the edge on social ones.
And I have your 5th as my 4th.
We switched on those.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say all 5s, and then I would perhaps disagree with you. I think actually that the self-pressed 5 is the most direct of all 5s.
Oh, interesting.
I think that social 5s like me talk too much.
Oh, good point.
And they can get theoretical
Yes.
and be very indirect. And I think that sexual 5s can be, the romantic streak that you talk about for sexual 5s.
Right.
I think they can want to manage to communicate in more subjective ways.
More poetic ways,
Yes.
I would say. You're right.
And I think that sometimes we say that self-pressed 5s communicate in one word.
Yeah, I think you've convinced me that the most direct 5 might be self-preservation 5. Now, especially now that I'm thinking about how long-winded you can be as a social 5.
Yes, I agree with that.
But I like your
unfortunately.
long-windedness also.
Now, what's your third?
My third is self-preservation 3.
Mine also.
Wow, we have something in common.
Okay. So why do you think it's self-press 3, the third one?
I think self-preservation 3s are often in a hurry. They really want to get things done. They don't get so distracted as the other 3s might by creating a good image. They just kind of want to get things done as quickly as possible. So I think they tend to be very direct.
I agree, and I think they're not like social 3s. They're not very political. They just go do, it's not much about image, so they don't care about convincing people in details. They just want to go do stuff, so they speak less.
It's very much about being productive.
Yeah, and they are the most impatient of all 3s, I think.
Maybe so, yes.
So people who are more impatient might become more direct.
Maybe so.
And my second is self-press 8. Which one is yours?
Well, my second it's really a tie, sexual 8 and social 8.
Oh, okay. So tell me more about that.
I think those two 8s are very direct, and I think I couldn't really decide who's more direct because I think they can both be direct in different ways. I think sometimes the sexual 8 has maybe more to say, but they're still pretty direct. And the social one can be a little bit more, the social 8 can be a little more soft-spoken, let's say, or they may not say as many things or need to impose their will in as many ways, but they're still pretty direct.
Okay, I agree with all that.
What about your number 2?
My number 2, as I said, is self-press 8, because I think they speak less, and when they do, they go straight to the point. And they are very objective also, in the sense that, sometimes we say they are like lions, that they sleep, but then they wake up to do what they need and go straight to the point. They hunt and so on. So it's like going straight to action. It's very, very instinctive.
Or just saying what they need or saying what they want and going for it without saying much more that's extra fluff.
Yeah, there is no explanation, no second options. It's just go.
So I agree with you so much that self-preservation 8 is my number 1.
What would you add about that?
I really wouldn't. I think we covered it. I think we said why self-preservation 8s can be the most direct.
Okay, so you must be wondering what the heck? What is his number 1 then?
Yes, I'm wondering very much. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Okay, so my number 1 is the social repressed instinct of all types.
Wow, social repressed.
Yeah. So
that's very tricky.
Yeah, let me try to explain that. We all have all 3 instincts: self-press, social, and sexual. And on the Subtypes podcast, we explained how the dominant instinct mixed up with the passion of type becomes our subtype. Now, there is also a repressed instinct, meaning one of the 3 operates much less than the other 2. And we call that the repressed instinct. And we're going to do a podcast on instinct sometime soon. Now, the social dominants, the 9 social dominants, are very political. Much more political than average, in most cases at least, than other people of the same type. While the social repressed people, from all 9 types, tend to be more objective than the colleagues of those 9 types. So I'd say that the most direct of all is not only the self-press 8, but the self-press 8 with social repressed instinct. But I also think that other types of all types, that are social repressed can be pretty direct. I just wanted to add this to just send a message, but that things are complex sometimes on the Enneagram, and we need to study different aspects of it, including the repressed instinct.
I see. Okay, that's very interesting. I'll think about what you said.
Okay, good. So, be such a pleasure always to talk to you. I learned so much, and I wonder, do you think our audience here on the podcast is also learning?
I hope so.
Yeah.
And I hope they join us again for our next Enneagram 2.0 podcast, where we talk about all things Enneagram.
The Enneagram 2.0 podcast goes live every other Thursday on all main platforms. Stay tuned to learn more about yourself and others.
Please click on like to help spread the word about our podcast.